Plumbers don't belong on yachts. That's what my son-in-law told me in front of 12 people, on the deck of a vessel that I paid for in full, with money I made with my own 2 hands. I didn't correct him right away. That was my first mistake, or maybe my greatest gift to myself, because the patience I showed in that moment, that slow, deliberate silence that everybody in earshot mistook for shame, that was the rope I was already handing him to hang himself with. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. My name is Stephen Wallace. I'm 57 years old. I've been a licensed diesel mechanic going on 12 years, and before that, I spent the better part of 2 decades doing every kind of trade work the city of Detroit, Michigan would throw at a man willing to get his hands dirty. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, roofing. You name it, I've fixed it. I'm not ashamed of a single callus on these hands. Every one of them put food on the table, bought my daughter her first bicycle, paid for her college education, and eventually, yes, bought a 42-foot motor yacht docked at the Detroit River. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Preston. Preston Caldwell came into my daughter Elena's life about 4 years before any of this happened. She met him at some corporate networking event downtown, the kind where everybody wears name tags and pretends the wine is good. He was a junior partner at a commercial real estate firm. Tailored suit, firm handshake, the kind of smile that's been practiced in a mirror so many times the man wearing it has forgotten it isn't real. Diana, my wife of 31 years, liked him immediately. I didn't. I couldn't explain it back then. Diana would ask me what my problem was, and I'd shrug and say, I don't know, something about him. She'd laugh and call me a protective old bear, and I'd let it go, because Elena was glowing. And a man who loves his daughter learns real quick that her happiness is not the place to plant your suspicions without evidence. Evidence, I always say. You don't pull an engine apart because you have a bad feeling. You wait for the diagnostic to confirm it. So I shook Preston's hand. Firm. I'll give him that. The handshake was firm. I came to dinners. I tolerated the way he'd look at my truck in the driveway like it was something that had wandered onto a golf course from another era. I smiled when he talked about his investment philosophy and his long-term positioning, and whatever else came out of his mouth during those first dinner conversations, none of which ever included a single question about what I did or what I had built. Not once. Not in 4 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings and birthday celebrations did Preston Caldwell ask me a single substantive question about my work or my life. He'd learned what I did in the first 5 minutes of meeting me, filed it away in whatever mental cabinet he kept for things that didn't interest him, and moved on. Diana noticed. She mentioned it to me once. With that measured tone, she raises things she thinks might upset me. He doesn't ask you much, does he? She said, one night after a dinner where Preston had talked for 90% of the time. He asks me how I'm doing. I said, that's something. He asks the table how everyone's doing. She said, it's not the same thing. I told myself, he's young. He'll grow. Young men with new success have a tendency to mistake their noise for substance. With time, I figured, he'd settle down. He'd realize there was more to the world than his own trajectory. He'd start to actually see the people around him. He didn't grow. He calcified. By the time Elena and Preston got married, a wedding I paid for entirely, by the way, every centerpiece and canapé and open bar tab, because Preston's parents were retired and had limited means, and I did not want my daughter's wedding to be smaller than she deserved. By the time they were standing at that altar, Preston Caldwell had cemented himself into a very particular and increasingly rigid shape. He was the kind of man who sorted people into categories the moment he met them. People who were useful to his career, people who were decorative additions to his social life, and people who were beneath his notice, who existed at the periphery of his world in a kind of blurred irrelevance. He had put me firmly in the third category. I noticed. I always notice. I just didn't say anything yet. The yacht came about 3 years into their marriage. I know how that sounds. I know a mechanic who buys a 42-foot motor yacht sounds like the setup to a joke. The kind of joke where the punchline is that he wins the lottery or inherits money from a mysterious uncle. But the truth is more boring and more satisfying than that. I had been quietly, steadily, almost boringly accumulating money for decades. No flashy investments, no crypto schemes, no gambling on markets I didn't understand. What I had was a skill that people always needed, a reputation that had been built. One completed job at a time, and a business that had expanded slowly and deliberately from a one-man operation into a small but profitable fleet of service contracts. Diana handled our household budget with the same iron discipline she brought to everything else in her life. She kept a ledger, an actual physical ledger, in a drawer in the kitchen, and every month she sat down with it and reconciled everything down to the last dollar. She grew up poor on the east side of Detroit, and she had the deep, unshakable commitment to financial clarity that comes from watching a family struggle because the numbers didn't add up. Between the two of us, we had built something real and sustainable, and entirely ours. Nobody gave it to us. Nobody invested in us. Nobody opened a door for us. We built it with the discipline of people who know that nobody is coming to save you, so you'd better save yourself. The yacht was the one big thing, the one extravagance. Diana had always loved the water, and I had grown up watching the Detroit River from a distance my whole childhood. That wide, moving body of water that separates Michigan from Ontario. That has always felt to me like proof that borders are human inventions and the world underneath them doesn't care. There was something about being on that water that felt like freedom of a particular and irreplaceable kind. We found Diana's dream through a broker who specialized in pre-owned vessels, 42 feet, twin diesel engines that I inspected myself before we signed anything. I wasn't going to let someone sell me a bad engine, not with my background. She needed work. Cosmetically, she was tired. But the bones were good, the engines were sound, and I could see exactly what she could become. I spent 6 months restoring her in my off hours. The work was therapeutic, scraping away layers of old neglect, retrefitting the galley. New paint, new upholstery, new nav systems. I rebuilt one of the engine components myself, because the quote I got for the replacement was insulting. When I was done, she wasn't just a boat anymore. She was exactly what I wanted her to be. Diana cried when she saw the name lettering on the transom. I'm not too proud to admit I had something in my eye that day too. We docked her at a private marina on the Detroit River. We took her out on weekends. Sometimes just the two of us. Those were my favorite days, the slow ones. Just Diana and me and the water and nowhere particular to be. Sometimes with friends. Maria and Everett came out often. Reed and Jocelyn, who we'd known for years through the neighborhood, became regulars. It was the best thing I'd ever bought, and I felt no guilt about it whatsoever. Elena and Preston came aboard for the first time that first summer. Elena was delighted. She'd always loved the water, had been out on small boats with us when she was little, had that easy physical comfort with being on the water that some people are born with and some people never find. She walked around the deck with her shoes off and her arms spread out like she was greeting something she'd missed. Preston stood on the deck in his boat shoes. He had purchased, I noticed, specific boat shoes for the occasion, which told me he'd thought intently about the appropriate image, looking around with an expression I couldn't quite read at the time. Not impressed. Not unimpressed. Something more like assessment. The way an appraiser looks at a property before giving you a number. Nice boat, Stephen, he said. Just like that. Nice boat. The way you'd compliment a neighbor's new gas grill. She's a yacht, I said, keeping my voice easy. He waved a hand. Right, I filed that away. Small drawer. I'd come back to it. The trouble started, really started, when Preston's firm began doing well. Not just doing well, doing spectacularly, at least by his account. He was making more money than he'd ever made, and the effect it had on him was not pretty. Success, I found, reveals character the same way pressure reveals cracks in metal. It doesn't create anything new. It just shows you what was always there underneath, what the surface had been covering. What was always there in Preston Caldwell, under the tailored suits and the practiced handshakes, was contempt. It came out slowly, the way bad habits do, as though the increasing comfort of his position had made him careless about hiding it. He started talking over Diana at family dinners. Small things at first, finishing her sentences with different endings, steering conversations away from whatever she'd raised. Diana is not a woman who makes a scene, so she'd let it pass. But I watched her jaw tighten sometimes, and I knew she was keeping count the way she keeps her ledger. He started referring to Elena's career. She was an excellent pediatric nurse, genuinely skilled, genuinely committed, the kind of nurse that parents specifically request, as her little job. He said it affectionately. That was the most galling part. He said it with a smile that was meant to communicate indulgence, as if her actual vocation was an adorable hobby she was allowed to have alongside the main project of being his wife. Elena didn't respond the way you might think. She didn't fight about it in public. What she did was go very still in those intervals, very controlled, and then change the subject, and I watched that happen enough times to understand that it was not a one-time accommodation, but a practiced pattern. She had been making herself smaller around him for longer than I'd known. That bothered me more than the boat shoes, more than the nice boat, more than anything, that stillness in my daughter's face. He started bringing his associates to gatherings, men who wore the same kind of pressed shirts and evaluated every room they walked into. The conversation would shift entirely in their direction. Deals and projections and positioning, and Diana and Elena would be left nodding politely at the margins. I'd make occasional attempts to redirect, ask something that brought it back to the table, and Preston would answer me with the minimal courtesy a man gives to someone whose time he's not really interested in. And then there was the way he talked about money. Not in a normal way. Not the way working people talk about money, which is as a practical resource that determines what you can and can't do. He talked about money the way some people use a weapon, as a measure of superiority, deployed strategically to remind the people around him of the distance between them and him. He'd reference restaurants by price. He'd mention his car payments with the offhand ease of a man who wants you to know the number without appearing to want you to know the number. He'd describe vacations in terms of what they cost rather than what they were. It was deeply boring, and I think on some level he knew that, because he always watched people's faces when he did it, checking for the reaction he was looking for. The reaction he was looking for was deference, and he got it often enough from people who didn't know better. Then there was the yacht comment, the one I'd half overheard through the wall. I had stopped by Elena and Preston's house to drop something off. Diana had sent food, the way Diana always sends food when she wants to express something she doesn't feel like saying out loud. I was in the hallway when I heard Preston's voice coming from his home office, the door partly open, talking on the phone in the loose, expansive way people talk when they think they're not being overheard. Yeah, well, you know how it is. He's got a hobby boat, calls it a yacht, Stephen's little project. I stood completely frozen in that hallway for a full 10 seconds. He said it without malice, which was almost the worst part. He said it with the careless fondness of a man describing something charming but trivial. My yacht. My Diana's dream. The thing I'd spent 6 months restoring with my own hands, that bore my wife's name on the transom, that we'd paid for with decades of combined labor. That was Preston Caldwell's little project anecdote. I set the food down on the entry table. I let myself out the front door. I drove home. That night I sat in the garage for a while, just thinking. I want to be clear. I am not a man who goes looking for conflict. I have never gone looking for conflict in my life. What I am is observant, and what I was observing, accumulated over 4 years of Sunday dinners and family gatherings and moments like the one in that hallway, was a pattern, a man who had no respect for anything I was, or had built, and increasingly, a man whose disrespect was beginning to bleed into the way he treated my daughter. I started paying attention in a different way after that night, a diagnostic attention, the kind that looks for root causes. The day everything changed started with a dripping tap. Diana and I had planned a day on the water, the full group, the people we actually loved. Elena and Preston, Diana's sister Maria and her husband Everett, who has been one of my closest friends for over 20 years and is the kind of man you want in your corner, specifically because he is slow to speak and always right when he does. Reed and Jocelyn, who we'd been close with for years. Reed had helped me source some of the engine parts for the yacht's first overhaul, and Jocelyn brought a cooler of food to every gathering that was approximately the size of a small vehicle, and contained enough for twice as many people as were present. Preston had also brought 2 associates. I hadn't known they were coming until they were standing on the dock. I said nothing about this. They were Preston's guests, and I was not the kind of host who makes people feel unwelcome, even guests I hadn't invited. It was a beautiful Detroit River day, the kind where the water catches the light at an angle that makes it look like something worth painting. The downtown skyline sitting back behind us as we cleared the marina, and ahead of us the river opening up, and the air smelling like water in distance. I went below deck before we cleared the no-wake zone. The forward galley tap had been dripping. I'd noticed it on the last outing, a soft washer, the most basic of fixes. I had the tap disassembled and reassembled in under 4 minutes. I know because I timed it in my head. I'd always time repairs. Not for any particular reason. It's just the habit of someone who's been doing this long enough to have a sense of how long things should take. When I came back up to the deck, Preston was holding court. He had found the most advantageous position on the deck, back to the horizon, face to his audience. and he was in the middle of a story about a property deal. The two associates were laughing. Elena was watching the water. Jocelyn was talking quietly with Maria near the stern. Everett was leaning on the rail with his arms folded, the body language of a man who is present but not engaged. Diana was in the salon. I assumed, or at the helm, I would find out later she had been standing just inside the salon door, where she could hear the deck clearly. I stepped up from below and Preston glanced over. "Stephen." He tilted his glass. "Where'd you disappear to?" "Fixing the forward tap," I said. Washer had gone soft, so it was dripping. One of the associates, the taller one, the one who had been laughing loudest, made a sympathetic face. "Things always breaking on these older boats, huh?" "She runs fine," I said pleasantly. "Just regular maintenance. Same as anything." Preston looked at his associates. Then he looked back at me, and I saw the exact moment he decided to say it. There was a brief calculation in his eyes, the kind of split-second decision that tells you everything about a person's character, because those unrehearsed intervals are when people show you who they really are. "You know," he said, and his voice was loud enough to carry clearly to everyone on the deck, "plumbers have no place here." He smiled when he said it. His associates smiled. It was meant to land as a joke, I think. A light, self-aware joke that everyone would laugh at and move past. The kind of remark that relies on the target being too good-natured or too cowed to push back. The deck went very quiet. I mean that literally. Whatever conversations had been happening stopped. Maria stopped talking. Jocelyn went still. Everett unfolded his arms and stood up straight. Elena turned from the water. And I looked at Preston Caldwell, this man in his linen shirt that he'd ironed specially, I'd bet, standing on the teak deck of a boat he'd never owned a square inch of, drinking a glass of whiskey that belonged to me. In the 5th year of his marriage to my daughter, which I had subsidized in more ways than I was ever going to bring up, I looked at him for a long interval, long enough that his smile started to develop a slight uncertainty at the edges. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. True to the title of the story I am telling you, I simply gave him a slow, measured nod, turned around, and walked straight to the helm. Behind me, the silence on the deck was heavy, suffocating. I heard Everett make a short, controlled sound that he turned into a cough. I heard Preston clear his throat and restart his story, louder and faster now, the way people talk when they're trying to paper over a crack in the wall with conversation. I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the water, and in my chest, very quietly, something settled into a new position, like a piece of machinery that's been slightly misaligned for a long time, finally clicking into place. Not yet, I thought, but soon. Here's what nobody tells you about revenge. The movies have it wrong, and they have it wrong because patience doesn't make for compelling cinema. In movies, revenge is immediate. It's hot. It's the overturned table, the public confrontation, the villain exposed in a single dramatic scene with music swelling underneath. Real revenge, the kind that actually satisfies, the kind that closes the account permanently, is cold and patient. It's built the way a good engine is built, piece by piece in a space where nobody is watching, until the time comes to turn the key and everything runs exactly the way you designed it to. I spent the drive home from the marina that evening thinking, not stewing, not running the same angry loop that rage loops run, thinking clearly and diagnostically the way I approach a complicated engine problem. What do I actually know? What do I actually see? What is the symptom telling me about the underlying cause? What did I actually know about Preston Caldwell? I knew he was arrogant. I knew he was careless with other people's dignity, which is a specific and meaningful kind of carelessness. The kind that tells you a person has never had to depend on others, has never found themselves at the mercy of someone else's goodwill, has lived a life insulated enough that consideration for the people below him has never felt necessary. And I had recently, in the weeks and months leading up to the boat trip, begun to notice something else, something harder to name, but equally real. Money things. Small things. The way Elena had started handling the check at family dinners before Preston could reach for his wallet, with a casualness that was a little too practiced. The way she deflected a question about their vacation plans with a brittle laugh that landed wrong. The way Preston had mentioned twice in 2 different conversations a particular investment he'd made that was going to come good any week now. Investment. Going to come good. Any week now. I'd been working long enough and living long enough to know what those words mean. They're the words of a man who bet on something and lost, and is not yet ready to tell anyone, including possibly himself. 3 days after that boat trip, I made a trip of my own downtown to the office of my estate attorney. I sat in a leather chair across from a man who had handled my business filings for 15 years, and I signed a newly drafted will. I completely removed Preston from it. If anything happened to me, his hands would never touch a single dollar of what I built. If anything happened to Elena, her share would go into a protected trust handled by independent trustees, entirely out of his reach. But I wasn't done. I called Everett after Diana was asleep. Sat in the garage with the door cracked and my phone and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "I need to know something," I said when he picked up. "About Preston," Everett said. He didn't make it a question. He just stated it the way Everett states things he's already figured out. "Yeah." A pause. I heard him shift in whatever chair he was sitting in. "I was wondering," he said slowly, "how long it was going to take you to make this call." I sat forward. "You know something already." "I know a few things," he said. "I know that Reed's brother-in-law works at a title company downtown. And I know that in the last several months he's noticed some unusual patterns in the transaction records for a set of commercial properties that Preston's firm has been involved with." "What kind of unusual?" "The kind," Everett said carefully, "where the numbers going in don't correspond to the numbers coming out, and the difference between them seems to be resting somewhere comfortable and quiet." I was silent for a beat. "Everett." "Yeah, I'm going to need your help with this." "I know," he said. "That's why I picked up the phone. Here's the thing about working with your hands your whole life, that people who've never done it don't understand. You learn systems. You learn that every system has rules, and every rule has a reason. And when something fails, it failed because one of those rules was violated somewhere along the line. You learn to trace back, to follow the chain from the symptom to the source, no matter how long that chain is, or how many bends it takes through dark spaces. The chain on Preston's finances took about 6 weeks to follow to its source. Everett connected me with Reed's brother-in-law through a discreet, quiet conversation, not to do anything improper, simply to understand what was publicly recorded and what a professional eye, experienced in these transactions, might legitimately observe. What we found, step by step, through public records and a handful of very quiet conversations with people who knew how to look, was not a complicated picture. Preston's firm had been involved in a series of commercial property investment vehicles over the past 2 years. On paper, structured correctly, they resembled legitimate investment products, pools of investor capital deployed into commercial real estate, generating returns distributed to investors on a schedule. In practice, what was happening was something else. The deals had not performed the way Preston had represented to investors. Losses had accumulated, quietly, and rather than disclosing those losses to the people whose money was at risk, Preston had done what men in his position sometimes do when they believe they are smarter than the system. He had used new investor funds to cover the appearances of returns to earlier investors. He had moved money between accounts in ways designed to obscure the reality of each investment's performance. And along the way, meaningful sums had found their way into accounts with Preston's fingerprints on them. It was not sophisticated. That was the first thing I thought when I understood the full shape of it. This is not sophisticated. A man who believed himself to be a financial strategist, a professional of acuity and vision, had constructed one of the most basic and well-documented varieties of financial fraud. The kind that gets written about in textbooks, the kind that works right up until someone decides to look. Nobody had decided to look yet. I sat with what I knew for a full week before I took any action. I want to be specific about this because it matters. The week I sat with it was not a week of anger. It was a week of deep thought about Elena. Because whatever I did here was going to hit her life first. Her name was connected to this man. Her finances were, to some extent I didn't yet fully understand, intertwined with his. Her future would be shaped by how this unfolded, and I was not going to be reckless with my daughter, the way Preston had been reckless with me. So I called Elena. I invited her to lunch at a diner we'd been going to together since she was in high school. A place on the east side with bad lighting and excellent coffee and a counter staff, who remembered your order. She showed up in her scrubs, straight from a shift, dark circles under her eyes that she'd covered imperfectly with makeup. She ordered eggs Benedict, black coffee, no substitutions, same as always. I watched her across the table and tried to read her face the way I'd been reading it since she was 4 years old and learning to hide when something was wrong. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm fine, Dad. Tired, but fine. It's been a busy stretch at work." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "How's Mom?" "Good. She's good." "Elena." She looked at me. "How are things with Preston?" The pause was not long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is a long time in a conversation between two people who know each other as well as Elena and I know each other. We've had some stress, she said. Financial stuff, it's nothing we can't handle, I think. Preston says it's just a short-term liquidity crunch. That phrasing landed on me like a dropped tool. What kind of financial stuff? I said. She shook her head slightly, looking at her coffee. It's Preston's department, really. I don't have much visibility into the business side of things. He handles it. How long has he been handling it? A longer pause this time. About 2 years, she said quietly. I looked at her. She was looking at her coffee. Elena, I said, I need you to listen to me carefully. She looked up, and I saw something in her eyes that I recognized. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of suspended breath. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular conversation and is not sure whether they're relieved or terrified that it's finally here. I've been looking into some things, I said. I want to be careful about what I tell you right now because I don't want to give you half a picture. But I need you to do something for me before we go any further. What? I need you to get your own attorney, someone who has never met Preston, who has no connection to his firm, and who you trust completely. She was very still. Dad, what did you find? I found questions that need professional examination, I said. And I found that you need to be protected before any of those questions get answered in a formal context. She put her coffee down deliberately. She looked at me for a long interval with those dark circle eyes in her pediatric nurse face, the face of someone who delivers bad news to parents for a living, and has learned to hold herself very steady in the moments when everything matters. How bad? She said. I don't know the full shape of it yet, I said honestly, but I think you should be prepared for it to be significant. She nodded once. A small, controlled motion. Okay, she said. Okay. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine for a second. Pressed down. Then she picked up her coffee and took a sip. And we sat there for a while longer and talked about her work, and her mother's garden and the marina. And I let her have that normalcy for a few more minutes, because she was going to need to bank it. Dad, she said, as we were getting ready to leave. Yeah, you've been looking into this for a while, haven't you? A little while, I said. Is it because of what he said on the boat? I thought about that. That wasn't the only reason, I said. But it woke me up to look harder. She was quiet, buttoning her jacket. Then, I'm sorry about what he said. Don't be, I told her. Don't apologize for him. Not to me. She met my eyes. He was wrong. On several counts, I agreed. But we'll get to those. The attorney I found for Elena practiced family and civil law out of a good firm downtown. A woman who had been at it for over 2 decades, who communicated in complete sentences and never performed reassurance she wasn't prepared to back up. Elena called me after their first meeting and said, I like her. That was enough. I also reached out through a client network I'd cultivated over 12 years of working in this city, to a man who had spent a portion of his career in financial crimes enforcement before moving into private consulting. I won't characterize him beyond that. What I will say is that when I sat with him for an hour and laid out the pattern Everett and I had traced, he looked at me over his coffee cup and said, You understand this is going to open some doors. That's the intention, I said. And your daughter's positioned correctly? She's with an attorney. She's being meticulous. He nodded, picked up his coffee. All right, I'll make some calls. What followed I can only describe from the outside. Things happened in offices I wasn't present for, conversations I wasn't part of, processes that moved at the pace of institutions rather than individuals. What I know is that the information we compiled found its way to the appropriate professional hands, and those hands found it worthy of formal attention. An inquiry began. Quiet at first. These things are always quiet at first. The noise comes later. I sat Diana down. One evening, when I had enough of the picture to give her a real one. She listened without interrupting. Diana never interrupts. She waits until you're done, and then she asks the 2 or 3 questions that get to the center of the thing. When I finished, she was quiet for a long interval. How long have you known all of this? She said. Clearly enough? About 6 weeks. I've been building the picture for longer. And Elena knows? She knows what she needs to know. She's protected. Diana put both hands flat on the kitchen table and looked at the wall behind my head for a long stretch. I recognized that posture. It's the posture of Diana Wallace doing mathematics that aren't about numbers. He sat at our table, she said, not angry, just factual. Yeah, He sat at our table and shook your hand and thanked us for Elena's wedding and called your boat a hobby project. Yeah. She nodded slowly, then she stood up and went back to the stove. She was making something that needed stirring, and she stirred it. You know what to do, she said. It was not a question. I know what to do, I confirmed. Then do it, she said. And she kept stirring. 31 years married to that woman. Never once in those 31 years have I made a major decision without her. And she has never once in those 31 years given me anything other than the clear, unvarnished version of what she thought. Diana Wallace does not perform support. She either supports you or she doesn't, and when she does, it's the load-bearing kind. The social unraveling began before the legal one, which is always the order of things in the world. Preston Caldwell lived in. The financial world is a social organism as much as an economic one, and it has immune responses. When something goes wrong, people begin to move away from it before they can articulate exactly why, the way animals get restless before a storm. Invitations to Preston dried up. Calls that had been returned within the hour started taking days. Lunches were scheduled and rescheduled, and then allowed to simply lapse into silence. The associates, including the 2 golf shirt men from the boat whose connection to Preston had been based on utility rather than affection, began creating targeted distance. Preston noticed. Of course he noticed. A man like Preston had built his entire sense of security on the social architecture around him, and he could feel that architecture shifting like ground before a sinkhole. He started showing up to family dinners with a new energy. Too bright, too fast. The laugh too loud, the stories running longer, the eye contact slightly too sustained. The kind of overcompensation that reads differently once you understand what it's compensating for. He had the specific look of a man who is running very fast in the dark and trying to look like he's walking in daylight. Elena held herself together with a steadiness that impressed everyone who knew what she was holding. She went to work. She came to dinner. When Preston wanted to argue about money at 10, 11 o'clock at night, she said she was tired, and meant it. She was meeting regularly with her attorney. She was building a foundation on her side of the wall, brick by quiet brick. The confrontation at our house happened when Preston showed up unannounced, which had never happened before because Preston always scheduled his entrances. He stood at our door with a face that was trying to be relaxed and achieving something between strained and desperate. Diana let him in. I came out from the kitchen. We sat in the living room. Diana sat in her chair. Preston sat on the couch and clasped his hands and started talking. It came out in pieces first, then in a rush. Complications at the firm. Misunderstandings about fund categorization. Everything was going to be resolved. He was very confident about this. But in the short term, there was some compression, some liquidity tightness. And he was looking at some options to bridge the gap. And as family, as people who he'd always considered, "How much?" I said. He blinked. He'd expected a longer on-ramp. I'm still working out the exact. Preston. My voice was the same temperature as the room. "How much are you asking for?" He said the number. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that told me everything I needed to know about the depth of the hole. Because a man doesn't open with that kind of ask unless he's been doing arithmetic in the dark for a very long time, and has run out of other options. "No," I said. He stared at me. "I mean, Stephen, I understand this is—" "No," I said again. Look, this affects Elena. This affects your daughters. Elena," I said quietly, "is going to be fine." Something moved across his face then. A new kind of calculation, the kind that happens when a man who has been assuming the shape of the landscape suddenly wonders whether the landscape has been rearranged without his knowledge. "What does that mean?" he asked. I held his gaze, and then I delivered the words I had held back on the water. "It means, Preston, that this is my family, this is my yacht, and you have no place here." I stood up. Diana stood up. The meeting was over. Preston left without saying goodbye at the door. I heard his car start in the driveway. I heard him back out, faster than he needed to, the way people drive when they need to feel like they're moving, even if they don't know where they're going. Diana came and stood beside me in the front hallway, after the sound faded. "He knows," she said. "He doesn't know what he doesn't know, which is the worst position to be in." She looked at me. "How much longer?" "Not long," I said. The formal inquiry became public record, quietly and then suddenly, the way things always become known. First a murmur in certain circles, then a factual statement in the business section of the local paper that spread through Preston's world like water finding level. Let me be precise about one thing. I did not leak. I did not orchestrate the public exposure. What I did was ensure that accurate information reached the people who were professionally and legally empowered to examine it. I am not a man who stages scenes. I am a man who builds things that work correctly, and then I let them run. What the inquiry revealed was, as I had suspected, not particularly complicated. The underlying scheme was simple enough that it was almost insulting. The kind of fraud that works because it relies on trust, and because the people being defrauded respect the man doing it enough to not look closely. The investors who lost money were real people. That mattered to me. I want to be clear that this was always part of my thinking. A retired couple from one of the older East Side neighborhoods, a small business owner from the suburbs who had saved for 20 years and decided to trust a man with a nice firm handshake. A woman in her 60s who had inherited a modest sum from her late mother and put it into what Preston had described personally and specifically as a conservative and stable investment vehicle. These were the people on the other side of Preston's positioning. When Elena read through the full record, I sat with her when she did, at her kitchen table in the house that we would shortly confirm was legally hers. She went quiet in the way she sometimes goes quiet when she's processing something that lands hard. He told me it was all legitimate, she said. He talked about integrity. He used that word. I know. He sat at your dinner table. I know. She folded the papers with the same precision her mother uses when handling something important. Edges aligned. Corners square. What happens now, she said. Now the process runs its course, I said. Your attorney knows what she's doing. And him? He'll have his own attorneys. It won't be fast, but it'll be complete. She nodded. Dad, she looked at me. Thank you for not letting it go. That was never an option, I said. The divorce papers were filed while the inquiry was still in its early formal stages. Elena's attorney had done the kind of thorough preparatory work that comes from genuine competence. Assets documented, accounts traced, the marital estate mapped with precision. What the mapping revealed was that Preston had managed, in the course of 2 years of financial deterioration, to run through most of their joint savings. Savings that had largely been built from Elena's income during the stretch when Preston's investments were consuming rather than producing. Elena's name was on the deed of their house. That was a detail Preston had never paid particular attention to, because he'd been the one to purchase the property and had always thought of it as his in the meaningful sense. His attorney, at some point during the negotiations, must have informed him that the legal sense was the one that mattered. The settlement was not gentle to him, but it was also not excessive. Elena did not want excess, did not want theater, did not want the kind of prolonged war that some divorces become. She wanted what was hers, clearly and cleanly, and she wanted it done. She got the house. She retained her retirement accounts. She walked away from the marriage with no debt attached to her name, because her attorney had been precise and thorough about documenting which liabilities were genuinely marital, and which had been incurred unilaterally by a man making decisions he'd hidden from his wife. She called me from the parking garage of the attorney's building when the finalization was complete. I heard the echo of the concrete space in her voice. It's done, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it. She's honest like her mother. She doesn't give you a fast answer when a true one requires a moment. Like I can breathe, she said. I didn't realize how long I'd been holding my breath. 2 years, maybe more. And now someone just opened a window. I had to take a second with that. Good, I said, when I had myself back. That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like. The formal legal resolution of Preston's professional situation took the shape that these things usually take when the evidence is clear and the attorneys on both sides understand the terrain. His firm was dissolved. His partners faced varying degrees of civil liability, depending on their level of knowing participation. Preston himself was charged with securities fraud and wire fraud, federal charges with the weight that implies. His attorney was skilled and expensive and earned his fee. A plea agreement was reached. Preston did not go to federal prison. But the terms of the agreement were not gentle, and they were not quiet, and they were not temporary. A substantial financial penalty, the kind that attaches itself to a man's credit history and follows him forever. A period of house arrest, and a lifetime prohibition from working in financial services, managing investor funds, or holding a fiduciary position over other people's money. The man who had stood on my boat and informed me that plumbers had no place there was now prohibited by federal agreement from ever again being trusted with other people's finances. He was also required to participate in a structured restitution process for the investors who had lost money, the retired couple, the small business owner, the woman with her mother's inheritance. They would not get everything back. These things rarely result in complete recovery. But they would get something, and they would have the formal acknowledgement that what was done to them was wrong, and documented, and punished. That mattered to me. That, more than anything else in the whole business, mattered to me. The gathering at Maria and Everett's place happened about 3 weeks after the inquiry became public. Not a celebration. I want to be clear about that. Nobody toasted. Nobody made a speech about what had happened. It was just dinner, the way we'd always had dinner, the same people in a warm house with good food, and the kind of conversation that happens when everybody in the room actually likes each other. Elena came in looking different, not just lighter in some metaphorical sense, actually different. The set of her shoulders had changed. Her face had the open quality it used to have before the years with Preston had taught it to be cautious. Jocelyn saw it first. She crossed the kitchen in about 4 steps and grabbed Elena by both hands and said, "Look at you." And Elena laughed. And it was the real laugh, the unguarded one. And I had to turn away for a second and look at something on the wall. Everett found me by the window with a beer, as he reliably does. "How's it sitting?" he asked. I looked around the room. Diana and Maria were in the corner in one of their conversations that had been running continuously for 30-plus years. Elena and Jocelyn were at the counter. Reed was examining something on Everett's bookshelf with the serious appreciation of a genuine reader. "Good," I said. "It sits right." Everett was quiet for a beat, looking at the same room I was looking at. "You know," he said, "when you called me that night, I almost told you to let it go. Why didn't you?" He thought about it, "Because I knew you'd nod and say okay, and then figure it out on your own, and this way I got to be useful." He took a sip. "Besides, what he said to you on the boat, in front of everyone." He shook his head. "A man says something like that, he's not just talking about plumbing." "No," I agreed. He wasn't. "He was talking about everything you are," Everett said. "Everything you built. He was telling you he didn't see it, didn't see you." He paused. "Men like that are dangerous, not because they're powerful, because they're careless." I nodded. We stood there a while longer. "You never raised your voice," Everett said. "On the boat. You just nodded and went back to the helm. Didn't need to say more than that." "No," he said. "You really didn't. The rest was just follow-through." We took Diana's dream out again about 2 months after the divorce was finalized. First real run of the season. The marina was crowded the way it always is when the weather turns and everyone remembers simultaneously that they own boats. We took our time leaving the dock, which is the only way to leave a dock if you care about your hull. Diana, Elena, Maria, and Everett, Reed and Jocelyn. The right people. The Detroit River was in excellent form. Long light, mild wind. The kind of afternoon where you feel like the water and the sky have come to an agreement to be beautiful for a few hours, and you'd be ungrateful not to be on the water when it happens. I took the helm when we cleared the no-wake zone, and kept it for most of the afternoon, because the helm is where I like to be on Diana's dream. It's where the engine speaks most clearly to you, where you feel the water through the hull, where all the work I put into this vessel over 6 months of restoration makes itself known in the way she moves. Elena came and stood beside me at one point, in the way that she used to stand beside me when she was small and I was working on something, close enough to be present but quiet enough not to intrude. "She runs well," Elena said, meaning the boat. "She runs great," I said. "I rebuilt the port engine coupling last winter. She's better than when I bought her." Elena was quiet for a beat, watching the water ahead. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Do you know what the thing is, about what he said? About plumbers?" "Tell me." "The thing is," she said, "the tap he was insulting you for fixing. The tap that started the whole thing. If you hadn't fixed it, it would have kept dripping. And a dripping tap becomes a leak. And a leak becomes damage. And damage in a boat, in a closed system below the waterline, becomes catastrophic if you don't catch it." She looked at me. "He was mocking you for preventing a disaster. That's what he thought was funny." I looked at her. "He didn't understand what he was looking at," she said. "He never understood what he was looking at. Not the boat, not you, not me." She paused, and I let him not understand for too long. "You were being a good wife," I said. "I was being quiet," she said. "There's a difference." We stood there on the water for a while, Detroit behind us, the river ahead, Ontario across the way, green and unhurried. "What do you want?" I asked her. Not right now. Long term. What do you want? She thought about that with the seriousness it deserved. I want to keep working, she said. I want to be good at my work. I want to come out on this boat when you'll have me. I want to stop measuring every decision against someone else's reaction. She paused. I want to be able to answer that question again without having to translate the answer through a filter first. You just did, I said. She smiled. It reached her eyes. It reached all the way up. Yeah, she said. I guess I did. Diana came up then, with 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Elena and one to me with the precise economy of motion that she brings to everything. She stood between us for a brief pause, looking out at the water, and then she put her arm around Elena's shoulders, and Elena leaned into her, and I looked out at the river and felt something in my chest that I don't have an engineering term for. Gratitude, maybe. The specific earned kind that comes not from things being given to you, but from things being protected. I want to close with a simple accounting, because I am, at heart, a practical man and I find clarity in clear numbers. What Preston Caldwell came to my boat with. Contempt. Assumptions. The unexamined confidence of a man who has never had to reckon with what he doesn't know. What Preston Caldwell left with. A federal plea agreement, a dissolved firm, a completed divorce, a permanent prohibition from financial services, and a restitution obligation to the people he stole from. What Elena left with. Her house, her career, her retirement accounts, her name clean of his debt, and the particular freedom of a person who has walked out of a confined space and rediscovered what unobstructed air feels like. What Diana and I have, the same thing we have always had, built soundly. A house that belongs to us, a boat with Diana's name on the hull, and a deep foundation that has only grown stronger through the years. What I am, 57 years old, a diesel mechanic, a man who can fix a dripping tap in under 4 minutes, and has been doing so in one form or another since before Preston Caldwell had his first suit fitting. A man who owns a yacht. This is the thing that Preston never understood, and it's the thing that men like Preston consistently fail to understand about men like me. He looked at my hands and saw limitation. He heard mechanic and placed me on a shelf below the level he'd decided I occupied. He stood on my boat and made a joke at my expense in front of my family and friends. And he genuinely believed, that I would absorb it the way furniture absorbs sound. He forgot that the quiet ones are quiet for a reason. He forgot that the man who fixes the tap knows exactly where to turn off the water. He forgot that patience is not passivity. It's precision. It's the difference between swinging a hammer and striking the exact point where the structure fails. I waited. I built the case the way I'd build an engine, piece by piece, tested and verified. And when I was ready, I turned the key. The engine ran exactly as designed. Preston Caldwell will spend the rest of his career explaining himself to regulators, making restitution payments on a schedule he didn't choose, and finding new ways to introduce himself to new people who don't know his name. He will not be forgiven by the investors he defrauded. He will not be welcomed back by the social world he cultivated. He will not have a relationship with the daughter I raised and loved more than anything I have ever built. And he will not, under any circumstances, step foot on my yacht again. That last part is a small thing, but small things are where it starts. I repaired the tap on the yacht, and my son-in-law said, "Plumbers have no place here." I gave him a slow nod and walked away. And then I went about proving in the most thorough and permanent way available to me exactly what that meant. Diana's dream sits in the water at her dock on the Detroit River, and she is in excellent condition. I check her monthly. I make the small repairs as they arise, the way a responsible owner does, the way a man who understands that everything requires maintenance if it's going to last. Some evenings, if the light is right, I go down to the marina alone. I sit on the deck with coffee and I watch the river move, the slow, unstoppable movement of water that doesn't care about your deals or your firm name or your pressed linen shirt. It just moves. It always moves. It keeps moving long after the men who thought they were important have been entirely forgotten. I'm not a philosophical man, but there is something in the Detroit River, in the way it runs between one country and another without asking permission, that has always felt true to me in a way I can't entirely put into words. What I can put into words is this: nobody gives you anything worth having. You build it, or you don't have it. You protect it, or you lose it. And when someone stands on what you built and tells you you don't belong there, you have 2 options. You accept that story, or you refuse it. I refused it, on behalf of Diana, who kept the ledger all those years. On behalf of Elena, who learned to breathe again. On behalf of every hour I spent with my hands in the work that built this life. I refused it completely and permanently, and without apology. And the river keeps moving. There's one thing I haven't told you yet. About a year after everything was settled, the divorce finalized, the legal proceedings concluded, Preston's situation resolved into its permanent shape, I got a call, short, professional, from a woman representing a group of the investors who'd been through the restitution process. She said they'd learned, through their attorneys, that the inquiry had begun because of information provided by a private individual. She said they didn't know who that person was, and they weren't asking. She said they just wanted the call made, on the chance that word might find its way to whoever it needed to find. She said, "Tell them thank you. Tell them the retired couple in the East Side bought their grandson a bike with the first restitution check. Tell them the woman with her mother's inheritance is taking a trip she'd put off for 15 years. I thanked her for calling. I said I'd pass the message along. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after that. In the garage, same spot where I'd sat that first night, after the call with Everett, with the cold coffee and the quiet and the long view of what needed to happen. A man told me plumbers had no place on my yacht. And somewhere in Detroit, a grandmother bought her grandson his first bike. I don't know how to explain what I felt in that garage, in that interval, and I've stopped trying. Some things you just put in the ledger and let them sit. Diana called me in for dinner, her voice through the door of the garage, same as it's always been. Warm, no nonsense. The voice of someone who has been calling me in from garages for over 3 decades and fully intends to continue. I put the phone in my pocket. I went in. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, the two of us, and we talked about nothing important. And it was the best meal I'd had in as long as I could remember. Sometimes that's the whole story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to the person who wronged you. It's what you preserve, what you protect, what you keep intact, what continues to exist and thrive in spite of everything they tried to diminish. The dinner, the boat, the marriage, the daughter, the life, still standing, still running clean. I am not a man who leaves jobs unfinished. So let me tell you one more thing. The thing that doesn't make it into the dramatic version of any story because it isn't dramatic. It's just math. In the years since all of this happened, I've continued working. The business has grown. Diana still keeps the ledger, though it's on a computer now, which she treats with the same precise respect she gave the physical one. Elena took a position at a larger hospital, a step up, clinically and professionally, one she'd been offered before and had declined because the scheduling didn't work with Preston's social calendar. She accepted it without a second thought. We take Diana's dream out regularly. I have logged more hours on the water in the 2 years since Preston's departure from our lives than in the previous 4 combined. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think when you stop spending energy managing around a difficult presence, you find that energy has to go somewhere, and it tends to go toward the things you actually love. Diana and I recently celebrated our 33rd anniversary on the water. 2 full years have drifted past since the storm cleared out of our family's dynamic. It was an early evening, the river turning deep shades of gold and amber the way it does when the sun gets low against the Detroit skyline. She brought a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a significant occasion and poured it into 2 mismatched glasses we keep tucked away in the galley. We sat at the stern, our shoulders touching, and watched the fading light ripple across the surface. "You know what I was thinking about today," she said. "What?" "That dripping tap," she said. "The one you fixed the day he said what he said." 3-minute repair, I said. "Right," she sipped her wine. "But if you hadn't fixed it, then it would have kept dripping. Eventually done damage. That's the thing about maintenance," she said. "People don't value it because it's invisible. The disaster that doesn't happen. The slow drip that never becomes a flood." She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the twilight. "That's what you do, Stephen. You prevent disasters. You always have." I thought about that. About the retired couple with the bike. About Elena's open face and the laugh she'd completely recovered. About the river moving on in front of us, indifferent and permanent and beautiful. "I'm just a mechanic," I said. "You're my mechanic," she said. She leaned her head on my shoulder. The boat rocked gently at anchor. The sky turned from orange to purple to the first dark blue of evening, and the river kept moving. It always keeps moving. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.